Kneel and apologize, my husband barked, demanding I give my hard-earned savings to his needy ex. He called me selfish for protecting my life's work, but he didn't know I'd already seen the bank transfers. He thinks I'm a doormat. I'm actually his debt collector. Let me tell you how it all began. Marcus slammed his palm on the kitchen counter so hard my coffee cup jumped. My design portfolio was sitting right there. 25 years of blueprints, client proposals, the career I built from nothing, and he shoved it aside like junk mail to make room for his fist. $3,000, he said, jabbing his finger at my chest. $3,000 from your little hobby fund for someone who actually needs it. Little hobby fund. He called 25 years of my career, every award on that wall, every client I earned on my hands and knees, a little hobby fund. The person he wanted me to hand my money to was Chloe Whitfield, his high school sweetheart, the woman who showed up 6 months ago crying on our doorstep with a foreclosure notice and a push-up bra, and who had been calling my husband at midnight ever since. And because I refused to bankroll her, Marcus was now standing 6 inches from my face, veins pulsing, telling me I was heartless and disgustingly selfish. Then he said something worse. That money isn't even yours, Judy. You earned it under this roof. That makes it ours. That makes it mine to give. 25 years of skipped lunches and $50 deposits. Mine to give. I felt my fingernails cut into my palms. But that wasn't the worst of it. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the cologne I'd bought him for Christmas, and he dropped his voice to that whisper, the one that used to sound like love, but now sounded exactly like a threat. You're going to sit down at that lunch table today, in front of my Aunt Martha and everyone else, and you are going to get on your knees and apologize to Chloe for being so cold. And then you're going to write her a check. Or I swear to God, Judy, I will make you regret the day you open that account. He called Chloe family. Family. A woman who hadn't spoken to us in over a decade was suddenly family. And I, the woman who had ironed his shirts, balanced his books, held his hand through 2 failed businesses, and quietly saved every penny while he threw money around like a man who'd never earned a hard dollar in his life. I was the enemy. Because I said no. I looked down at my wedding ring, 23 years on my finger. It used to feel like a promise. Standing there in that kitchen, it looked exactly like what it had become, a handcuff. But here's the thing Marcus didn't know. 3 hours before he stood there barking orders at me, I had been sitting at his laptop. And what I found in a folder he thought was hidden would change everything. The bank transfers, the stolen blueprints, the secret he built for Chloe using my life's work. He had no idea he wasn't yelling at a defeated wife. He was yelling at a woman who had already loaded the gun. All she needed now was a room full of witnesses. I'm standing in my own kitchen, feeling like a stranger in my life. If you've ever been made to feel small for protecting what's yours, please like this video and tell me in the comments where you are listening from today. I need to know I'm not alone. Now, I need you to understand something about that savings account, because it wasn't just a number on a screen. It was $50,000, and every single cent of it had a story. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the woman I was before Marcus tried to turn me into someone I'm not. I started my career as an interior designer in 1998 with a folding table, a secondhand laptop, and a dream so big it scared me. I was working out of a rented room above a dry cleaner's in Glendale, and the whole place smelled like chemicals and ambition. I didn't have clients. I didn't have connections. What I had was a stack of design magazines I'd collected since high school, and a grandmother who told me that the only lottery worth playing was the one where you buy a ticket with your own sweat. So that's what I did. I skipped lunches. Not sometimes, every day for 3 months straight. I'd pack a thermos of black coffee and a handful of almonds, and I'd tell myself that hunger was just my future knocking. I took every job no one else wanted. I redesigned a laundromat in Van Nuys for $800. I staged a foreclosed duplex in Burbank for free just to get photos for my portfolio. I once drove 45 minutes to measure a bathroom in Pomona that was smaller than most closets because the client could only afford $200, and I needed every single one of them. And I saved. Lord, did I save. $50 here, $100 there. I had a spreadsheet, and I know that sounds boring, but that spreadsheet was my Bible. Every row was a sacrifice. Every column was a choice I made. No new shoes, no weekend trips, no fancy dinners. While other women in my neighborhood were getting their nails done on Saturdays, I was at Home Depot pricing cabinet hardware for a client who was paying me in installments. There were nights I sat in that rented room above the dry cleaners, eating ramen noodles at 11 o'clock, staring at fabric samples by lamplight, and I would whisper to myself, "This is temporary. The struggle is temporary. What you're building is permanent." And slowly, impossibly, the number grew. 5,000, 10,000, 20, 30. Every milestone felt like planting a flag on a mountain I was climbing alone. Marcus, on the other hand, had a different relationship with money. He was generous, I'll give him that, but his generosity always seemed to come with an audience. He'd buy rounds of drinks for his buddies at the sports bar in Old Town, $50, $60 a night, like it was confetti. He bought season tickets to the Dodgers and invited his college friends, never once asking if we could afford it. And when I sat at the kitchen table with my calculator and my spreadsheet, carefully noting every $50 deposit into my savings, he'd lean over my shoulder and laugh. One Thanksgiving, in front of his entire family, he said, "My wife counts pennies like it's her religion. If penny pinching were an Olympic sport, Judy would bring home gold." His friends howled. His brothers slapped the table. Even his mother covered her smile with her napkin. I laughed too, because that's what you do when the alternative is crying at the dinner table. But something small and sharp twisted inside me that night, and it never fully untwisted. The worst part, and this is the thing that still makes my chest tight when I think about it, was the time Marcus's import business went under in 2011. He'd invested $60,000 of our joint savings into a shipping venture with his college roommate, and when it collapsed spectacularly, owing money to 3 different creditors, he came home looking like a man who'd lost a war. I didn't yell. I didn't say, "I told you so," even though I had told him so, 3 times, in writing, with spreadsheets attached. I sat down, opened my private savings account, the one I'd built cent by cent over 13 years, and transferred $12,000, nearly a quarter of everything I'd built, to cover our mortgage for the next 4 months so we wouldn't lose the house. He took it. He nodded. He said, "We'll get through this." And that was it. No thank you. Not then, not ever. Not once in 12 years did Marcus Chen acknowledge that my penny-pinching religion had saved the roof over his head. I made myself believe that's what marriage was. You carry the weight when the other person drops it. But looking back now, sitting where I'm sitting today, I realize there's a difference between carrying weight and being buried under it. And I had been underground for a very long time. The thing about red flags is that they don't arrive waving themselves in your face. They tiptoe in like house guests who overstay their welcome, so gradually that by the time you notice, they've already moved into the spare bedroom and changed the locks. The first flag was the passwords. Marcus had never been a private man. His phone code was our wedding anniversary, 0614, and his laptop password was Go Dodgers, which was about as secretive as a billboard on the 101 freeway. Then one night in March, about 4 months before the kitchen ultimatum, I picked up his phone to check the weather, and the screen asked me for a 6-digit code I'd never seen. I updated it, he said from the couch without looking up from the television. Work stuff. You know how it is. Work stuff. Marcus sold commercial real estate for a mid-level firm in Arcadia. The only thing confidential about his job was how little of it he actually did. Then came the charity work. Marcus started volunteering his time, his words, not mine, to help Chloe get her new business off the ground. A design studio, he said, something with interiors. And wouldn't it be nice if Judy could give her some advice sometime? I remember the way he said interiors, like it was a foreign word he'd just learned, rolling it around his mouth like a marble. And I remember the prickle at the back of my neck. That prickle was my instinct trying to scream through 23 years of trained silence. My neighbor Linda, a retired fourth-grade teacher with eyes like a hawk and a heart as wide as her famous rose garden, stopped me one afternoon while I was getting the mail. Linda was the kind of woman who noticed everything and said something about half of it, which meant when she did speak up, you listened. "Judy, honey," she said, adjusting her sun hat against the Pasadena glare. "I saw Marcus the other day helping some woman carry furniture into that new studio space on Pine Street. Real pretty woman, dark hair, expensive taste in throw pillows. I figured it was one of your clients?" I didn't have a client on Pine Street. I didn't have a studio on Pine Street. I didn't know anyone with expensive taste in throw pillows who wasn't me. I smiled at Linda and said it must have been a friend of his, something about a charity project. And I walked back inside with my heart beating so loud, I was sure the entire neighborhood could hear it through the walls. That same week, I found a text on the iPad we shared. Marcus was careless about which devices his messages sync to, the kind of carelessness that only comes from believing you're smarter than everyone around you. The text was from Chloe, and it said, "You're the only one who truly believes in me. I don't know what I'd do without you." I read it 3 times. 5 months into her little reappearance in our lives, and she was already writing love letters disguised as gratitude. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that iPad through the kitchen window and watch it shatter on the driveway. Instead, I set it back on the counter face down, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it very slowly. Because Grandma Rose always said that a woman who acts out of rage burns her own house down, but a woman who acts out of patience burns theirs. Then, Marcus did something that would have fooled anyone who wasn't already paying attention. He brought me flowers. Not grocery store carnations wrapped in cellophane, real ones. A gorgeous arrangement from that florist on Colorado Boulevard. The one where a bouquet costs more than some people's car payments. And he cooked dinner, which he hadn't done since our 15th anniversary. Chicken parmesan, my favorite, with the breadcrumbs he actually toasted by hand instead of using the store-bought kind. He even lit candles and put on that Norah Jones album I used to love. And right there, standing in my own dining room watching my husband pretend to be a man who still cherished me, I understood something with perfect, crystalline clarity. Guilt doesn't look like sadness. Guilt looks like effort. A guilty man bearing flowers isn't being romantic. He's building a decoy. He's a thief who brought his own alibi. I ate the chicken parmesan. I complimented the breadcrumbs. And inside my chest, the last thread of denial snapped quietly, like a guitar string in an empty room. The next Sunday morning, while Marcus was at his weekly basketball game at the Y, the one he never missed, rain or shine, because appearances mattered more to him than actual commitments, I sat down at his desk in the home office and opened his laptop. He'd changed the password, of course, but Marcus was never as clever as he believed. The password hint he'd set for himself said, "Childhood Street," and I'd heard him mention Chloe's old neighborhood on Maple Drive enough times during their nostalgic little reunion dinners to try it. Maple Drive 1985. I was in. My hands were shaking, but my mind was a lake without a single ripple. I found the bank transfers first. They were buried in a folder he'd titled Business Expenses, which was almost laughable because Marcus hadn't had a legitimate business expense worth naming in 3 years. There they were, lined up like little soldiers of betrayal. $200 in January, $500 in March, $300 in April, $650 in June, another $400 in August. Month after month, drip by drip, like a faucet he thought no one could hear, Marcus had siphoned $8,000 from our joint checking account and funneled it directly to Chloe Whitfield. $8,000. The death by 1,000 cuts, except each cut had a date stamp and a transaction number, and the initials of the man who swore before God to be my partner. I printed every single page. I used the color printer because I wanted the bank's logo crisp and clear. My hands were steady now. My eyes were dry. There's a moment in every woman's life when grief tries to take the wheel, and you have to decide whether to let it drive you into a ditch or lock it in the trunk and take the highway yourself. I chose the trunk. I chose the highway. I chose 70 miles an hour with both hands on the wheel and my eyes straight ahead. But the bank statements weren't the worst of it. Not even close. Not even in the same universe. In another folder on that laptop, this one marked CW Studio Assets, and the fact that he'd even created a dedicated folder for her with her initials made my blood run cold in a way I didn't know blood could. I found something that nearly stopped my heart. My blueprints. My designs. The complete plans I'd spent 14 months developing for the Oakhurst Residence Project, the one that landed me a Regional Design Excellence Award from the California Interior Design Association in 2019. The floor plans for the Belmont renovation that I'd hand-drawn over 6 weekends while Marcus watched football in the next room. The material palettes I'd created at 2 in the morning when inspiration wouldn't let me sleep. The custom lighting layouts that took me 3 trips to a specialty showroom in West Hollywood to finalize. Every single piece of intellectual property that made me who I am as a designer. My fingerprints, my eye, my years of expertise translated into lines and colors and spaces that worked because I understood how people live in a room. They were all there, meticulously renamed, reformatted with Chloe's header, and filed under her name. She hadn't just taken my husband's attention and our money. She was building her entire career on my bones. She was going to open her doors on Pine Street with my life's work hanging on her walls and my ideas coming out of her mouth. And Marcus had handed it all to her like a bouquet of stolen roses. Marcus didn't just betray our marriage. He betrayed the one thing I held more sacred than any vow: my work, my self-reliance, the very principle he was now standing in my kitchen calling selfish. He had taken the blueprints of my American dream, the dream I'd built with skipped lunches and ramen dinners and $50 deposits and 12-hour days, and he had handed them to another woman like party favors at a birthday that wasn't mine. This wasn't infidelity of the heart. This was theft of the soul. I sat in that office chair for a long time after that, listening to the hum of the laptop fan and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, and I felt something shift inside me, something tectonic and permanent, like the earth deciding it was done being still. The grief locked itself away in a room I wouldn't visit again for months, and in its place came something quieter, something leaner, something with teeth. Purpose. I heard Marcus's car pull into the driveway outside. I heard the engine cut. I heard his footsteps on the walkway, and then I heard him whistling. Actually whistling. Some careless tune he'd picked up from the radio. The sound of a man who had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had already opened up. I closed the laptop. I stood up. I pushed the chair in. And I walked into the hallway and smiled at him as he came through the door. Because that's what a woman does when she's no longer a wife, but a strategist. And the battle has just begun. For the next 3 weeks, I became the greatest actress in Pasadena. And if you've ever had to smile at someone who's destroying you, you know exactly how exhausting that kind of performance can be. I told Marcus I'd been thinking about it, and that maybe he had a point about the $3,000 for Chloe. Maybe I was being too rigid, I said, and I watched his face light up with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed his own propaganda. His shoulders dropped like sandbags being released, and he pulled me into a hug and said, "I knew you'd come around, babe. You're a good woman. You just needed to see it from the right angle." That hug, the warmth of his arms around me, the smell of his cologne, the same cologne I'd bought him, the gentle pressure of his hand on the back of my head. It was the loneliest embrace of my entire life. I cooked his favorite pot roast that Thursday. The one with the garlic mashed potatoes and the rosemary gravy that takes 4 hours to make properly if you do it right, and I always did it right. I set the table with the good china. I asked him about his day and laughed at his jokes and refilled his wine glass. And every single moment of it was a performance so convincing that if they gave Oscars for surviving a marriage, I'd have taken home Best Actress, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay. Meanwhile, behind the curtain, the real work was happening. I contacted Patricia Nguyen, a forensic accountant in downtown LA, whose reputation in divorce proceedings was so razor-sharp that CPAs whispered her name like a weather warning. I called David Rosenthal, a copyright attorney in Century City who specialized in intellectual property cases and who, when I laid out the evidence across his conference table, went very quiet for a very long time before looking up at me and saying, "Mrs. Chen, you don't just have a case, you have a fortress." I documented everything. Every bank transfer printed in color. Every stolen file with its original timestamp alongside the renamed version. Every piece of evidence organized, cross-referenced, and annotated. I made 3 copies. One for Patricia, one for David, and one for myself, which I sealed in a waterproof envelope and locked in a fireproof box at my friend Karen's house across town, because I was not about to store evidence anywhere Marcus could accidentally or deliberately find it. One evening, I almost got caught. I was sitting at the kitchen table organizing the printouts into the manila envelope when I heard Marcus's footsteps on the stairs. He wasn't supposed to be home for another hour. His Wednesday night poker game usually ran until 10, but here he was, padding down the hallway in his socks. I had maybe 4 seconds. I swept the papers off the table and shoved the envelope under the fruit bowl, then grabbed the nearest magazine and opened it to a random page. He came around the corner, looked at me, and said, "You're reading about Mediterranean tile patterns at 9 o'clock at night?" My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. "Research for a client," I said, with a smile so calm it should have won me a second Oscar. He shrugged, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and went back upstairs. I sat there for 5 full minutes without moving, listening to the blood rush in my ears. And then I picked up the envelope and drove it to Karen's house that very night. No more close calls. No more risks. From that moment on, everything stayed off-site. But I needed one more piece. The witness. The one person whose opinion Marcus valued more than his own reflection. The one person in his family whose judgment he feared like a change in the weather. Aunt Martha. Martha Chen was Marcus's maternal aunt, a 78-year-old retired family court judge from San Bernardino who had spent 30 years on the bench watching people lie under oath and had developed a gaze that could curdle milk from across a courtroom. She was the family matriarch, the woman who decided who got invited to Thanksgiving and who got quietly uninvited, who controlled the family trust fund, and whose approval Marcus had been performing for his entire adult life. He adored her the way a man adores a mirror that always tells the truth. Reluctantly, desperately, and from a safe distance. So I called Martha on a Wednesday evening and kept my voice as light as lemon meringue. "I'm having a little family lunch this Sunday," I said. "Nothing fancy. Pot roast, good company, maybe a nice bottle of wine. I'd love it if you could make the drive." Martha, bless her deeply suspicious heart, paused for just a beat too long. "Judy," she said, "are you all right?" "I'm wonderful," I said. And for the first time in months, I meant it. That night, alone in the guest bedroom I'd been sleeping in since the worst of the arguments started, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the nightstand drawer. Inside was a photograph of Grandma Rose, taken on the porch of her little house in Bakersfield the summer before she passed. Sweet tea in her hand and a smile that could make you believe everything would be okay, even when it wasn't. She had a saying for everything, my grandmother, but the one that carried me through the darkest nights, the ones where I lay awake staring at the ceiling and wondering if I was strong enough for what was coming, was about a boat. Marriage, she used to say, rocking gently in that creaky chair of hers while the Bakersfield sun turned everything gold, is like two people in a rowboat. You both have to row, or you just go in circles. But listen to me, baby girl. If your partner picks up that oar and starts swinging it at your head, you don't sit there and take it. You don't try to reason with the oar. You jump in the water and swim to shore, because a bruised woman in a broken boat never reaches the other side. I held that photograph to my chest and whispered into the dark, "I'm swimming, Grandma. I'm swimming." The next morning, I pressed my best blouse, the cream silk one I wore when I wanted to feel like the professional I'd spent 25 years becoming, organized the manila envelope with every document arranged in the exact order I planned to present them, and began setting the dining table. The plates were the good ones, the porcelain set with the blue trim that I'd bought at a little shop in Carmel 15 years ago, on a trip I took by myself, because Marcus said antique shopping was a waste of a weekend. I'd loved those plates since the moment I saw them. I used them only for occasions that mattered, and this Sunday was going to matter more than any holiday I'd ever hosted. Then the phone rang. It was Martha, and her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's about to deliver a truth you're not ready to hear. "Judy, I need to tell you something before tomorrow, and I'm going to need you to sit down." I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone like a lifeline. "This isn't Marcus's first rescue mission, honey. Before you, there was a girl named Donna Kessler. He was engaged to her for 8 months back in 1996. Same pattern. He found a woman in financial trouble, played the knight in shining armor, started draining his own savings to prop her up, got so wrapped up in being her savior that he forgot he was supposed to be her partner. When Donna figured out that Marcus was more addicted to being needed than he was capable of being faithful, she called off the engagement and moved to Oregon. His mother was so humiliated she made me swear to never mention Donna's name again. I've kept that promise for 27 years, Judy. I'm breaking it now because you deserve the truth before you walk into tomorrow." The room tilted around me. 23 years. 23 years, and I never knew. Marcus didn't have a weakness for damsels in distress. It was his entire operating system, his identity, the role he needed to play to feel like a man. I wasn't his first audience. I was just his longest-running show. Grandma Rose always said you can't save a man who is trying to drown you. Marcus thinks he's the captain, but I've already jumped ship. Do you think I should have confronted him privately? Or was the public lunch the right choice? Leave a like and comment the word strength if you agree with my choice. Sunday arrived the way verdicts do. Slowly, inevitably, and with a weight that presses on your chest before you even open your eyes. I woke at 5, showered, dried my hair, and put on the navy blue wrap dress that always made me feel like I could walk into any room and command it. I went downstairs and started cooking. The kitchen filled with the smell of rosemary and garlic, and for a brief, disorienting moment, it almost felt like a normal Sunday. Almost. Marcus came down around 9, freshly shaved, wearing the salmon-colored polo shirt he reserved for occasions when he wanted to project respectability. He kissed my cheek. He helped set the table, straightening forks with a precision he never applied to anything else in our marriage. He wanted this lunch to be perfect, because in his mind, it was his stage. He was the director, the leading man, and the hero. He was going to be the magnanimous husband who graciously forgave his stubborn, penny-pinching wife, and Chloe was going to be the trembling, grateful friend who deserved everyone's sympathy and 3,000 of my hard-earned dollars. It was a play, and Marcus had already written the final act. He just didn't know I'd rewritten every single page. Chloe arrived first, 20 minutes early, wearing a white sundress chosen with surgical precision to project innocence. She carried a bottle of wine and a smile so carefully constructed it should have come with a patent. "Judy, thank you so much for having me," she said, her voice deploying that breathy, fragile quality certain women use when they want you to lower your guard. I took the wine, told her she looked lovely, and led her to the living room where Marcus was waiting with literally open arms. Then came Marcus's younger sister, Vanessa, up from San Diego with her husband, Tom. Vanessa was what I'd charitably call a diplomat, and less charitably call a weather vane. She stayed neutral in every family conflict, which in practice meant she sided with whoever seemed to be winning. Tom was a decent, quiet man who kept his opinions behind his teeth until they counted. And finally, at precisely noon, the front door opened and in walked Aunt Martha in a charcoal pantsuit, carrying an expression that could have frozen the entire San Gabriel Valley solid. She kissed me on the cheek. She shook Marcus's hand. She looked at Chloe the way a veteran jeweler examines a cubic zirconia, with polite, devastating recognition that it wasn't the real thing. We sat. Marcus carved the pot roast with the confidence of a man who had never questioned his right to be at the head of any table. He poured the wine. He smiled at everyone. And then, because Marcus could never resist a captive audience, he stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, and the table went obediently quiet. To Chloe, who's had a tough year but is bouncing back with incredible strength. Her new design studio is going to be something really special, and I'm proud, genuinely proud, to say that this family supports the people it loves, no matter what. He looked directly at me when he said that last part, and it wasn't a toast anymore. It was a command. Apologize, write the check, fall in line. Vanessa clapped politely. Tom reached for his wine. Chloe dabbed her eye with a linen napkin in a gesture so rehearsed I almost expected a curtain call. And Marcus sat back down with the deeply satisfied expression of a man who had just delivered the closing argument in a case he was certain he'd won. That's when I stood up. Not fast, not angry, slowly. The way the tide comes in, quiet and inevitable and impossible to stop once it starts. I didn't have a wine glass in my hand. I had a manila envelope. "Marcus," I said, and my voice came out steady as bedrock. That was a beautiful toast. And since we're all here talking about Chloe's new studio, I think this family deserves to know the full story of how it got started. The room didn't just go quiet. It went still, the way a forest goes still when something large moves through it. Marcus's smile froze on his face like a screenshot of a man who just heard a sound in the dark he can't explain. I opened the envelope and laid the first document on the table, right beside the pot roast. This is a summary of transactions from our joint checking account. Over the past 12 months, $8,000 has been transferred to an account belonging to Chloe Whitfield. 200 here, 500 there. Authorized by Marcus. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. Vanessa's fork stopped midair. Tom set his glass down. Chloe's rehearsed tears evaporated faster than a creek in August. I laid down the second set. These are my original design files for the Oakhurst residence and the Belmont renovation. Copyrighted, time-stamped, and registered with the United States Copyright Office under my name. Then the third. And these are the exact same files, found on Marcus's laptop, renamed under Chloe's name for use in the studio on Pine Street. The studio that my husband has been financing with our money and furnishing with my intellectual property. Aunt Martha set down her napkin with the deliberate calm of a woman who had heard thousands of testimonies and just heard one that genuinely surprised her. She turned to Marcus with the focus of a searchlight and said in a voice made of cold steel, "Marcus David Chen, you look me in the eye right now and tell me this isn't true." Marcus opened his mouth. For 5 long seconds, nothing came out. It was the first time in 23 years I'd seen him speechless. And I want to be honest, it didn't feel good. It didn't feel like victory or revenge. It felt necessary, like surgery, like cutting out something malignant and finally holding it up to the light so everyone could see what it was. Chloe tried to bolt, clutching her purse. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Martha's palm struck the table hard enough to rattle the porcelain, and those blue-trimmed plates I'd bought in Carmel rang out like bells. "Sit down, young lady. Nobody leaves this table until every person here has heard the truth." Chloe sat. Vanessa, Switzerland, always Switzerland, looked at her brother with undiluted disgust for the first time in her life. Tom shook his head slowly, watching a building he once respected come down. Marcus found his voice, ragged and desperate. "Judy, baby, you're blowing this out of proportion. I was helping. Everything I did for this family." I let those words hang like smoke from a fire everyone could see. Then I spoke, and every word was a nail. "No, Marcus, you didn't do it for this family. You took my money to play hero because it's the only role you've ever known. You stole my work and gave it to another woman because being her rescuer mattered more than being my husband. And this morning, in our kitchen, the kitchen I redesigned with my own hands, you told me to get on my knees and apologize for having the courage to protect what I built." I paused. "You should also know that I filed for divorce on Friday. My attorney submitted the paperwork. It's done." The sound Marcus made wasn't a word. It was the sound of a man who walked into what he thought was his courtroom and discovered he was the defendant. He turned to Martha, searching for rescue. But Martha said, "She's done the right thing, Marcus. And I should have told her about Donna Kessler years ago. That's a failure I'll own." His face went white. "You told her about Donna?" Martha straightened her napkin. "I told her the truth, something this family should have practiced a long time ago." Chloe lunged for the front door, but Martha was on her feet, and 78 years old or not, that woman carried the authority of 3 decades on the bench. She didn't need to block the door physically. She blocked it with 6 words. "Miss Whitfield, I'd get a lawyer." Chloe froze, hand on the knob. Martha continued with the precision of a judge delivering a sentence. "The copyright documentation Judy assembled is more than enough for a civil action. I'd find excellent counsel before attempting to open any studio in this state." The composure Chloe had worn all afternoon didn't just crack, it disintegrated. Her shoulders folded, her chin dropped. For the first time since she'd reappeared in our lives, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who bet on someone else's hand and lost everything. Marcus made one final play. He came around the table, took my hands, and looked into my eyes with the full performance. Wounded, tender, pleading, the entire arsenal of a man who'd always believed love was a currency that could cover any debt. "Judy, don't do this. 23 years. Our vows. Doesn't any of it mean something?" I looked at his hands holding mine. The same hands that typed Maple Drive 1985. The same hands that authorized the transfers. The same hands that dragged my files into a folder with another woman's initials. The same hands that pointed at me that morning and told me to kneel. 23 years means everything, Marcus," I said. "That's exactly why I'm doing this. Because I spent 23 years building something real. A career, a savings, a life built on hard work and integrity. And I will not watch you give it away piece by piece to someone who never earned a single day of it." I pulled my hands free. I picked up the envelope. I looked around the table one last time. At Vanessa, crying silently. At Tom, who gave me a single solemn nod. At Martha, whose eyes held something that looked very much like pride. And at Marcus, staring at the tablecloth like a man who'd just been told the world was a different shape than he'd always believed. I walked to the front door of the house I had helped pay for, the house I had decorated with my own designs, the house where I had poured 23 years of hope and patience and quiet endurance. I closed it softly behind me. Not a slam, just a click. The way you close the cover of a book you finally finished reading, knowing you will never open it again. My car was packed, 2 suitcases loaded the night before. I sat behind the wheel and looked at the house one last time. The jasmine I'd planted, the mailbox I'd repainted, the kitchen window where a man had told me to kneel. I started the engine and pulled out of that driveway. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me I needed to see. 6 months have passed. I'm sitting on the porch of a small bungalow in Silver Lake that I rent with my own money. It's not big, it's not fancy. The porch railing needs repainting, and the kitchen faucet drips if you don't turn the handle just right. But every square inch of it is mine, and nobody here has ever told me to kneel. My design studio reopened 3 months ago, built not on stolen blueprints, but on 25 years of experience, a loyal client list that followed me because they trusted my eye and my integrity, and a reputation Chloe Whitfield could never replicate, no matter how many of my files she downloaded. The copyright lawsuit is moving forward. David tells me we have an exceptionally well-documented case. Chloe's Pine Street studio closed before it ever served a single client. Turns out stolen blueprints don't come with the 25 years of talent, instinct, and hard-earned knowledge required to execute them. Knowing what a beautiful room looks like on paper and knowing how to build one are two very different things. Marcus is living in his parents' spare bedroom in Riverside. Our house is being sold in the divorce settlement, and without my financial discipline quietly holding everything together, his hidden debts surfaced like wreckage after a storm. Aunt Martha revised the family trust. Marcus was removed from the primary beneficiary list. He found out from Vanessa, who called him on a Tuesday afternoon because, she told me later, I figured he should hear it from someone who still loved him, even though I'm not sure I like him very much right now. I talked to Linda last week. She drove all the way to Silver Lake with a jar of her homemade apricot jam and a hug that lasted longer than most conversations. Judy, she said, peering at me over her reading glasses, I always knew you were the strong one. That house was lucky to have you, not the other way around. I cried after she left. Not from sadness, from the sheer, overwhelming, bone-deep relief of being seen by someone who wasn't asking for anything in return. Some mornings, I sit out here with my coffee. The good coffee. The kind I buy for myself now without checking a spreadsheet. And I think about Grandma Rose and her rowboat. I think about those 23 years of rowing while Marcus swung the oar. I think about the woman who stood in that kitchen on a Tuesday morning and refused to kneel. And I am proud of her. Not because she was brave in the loud, dramatic way. Because she was ready. She'd been getting ready for years. One $50 deposit at a time. One late night over blueprints at a time. One quiet act of self-preservation at a time. Building a fortress out of discipline and self-respect that no amount of guilt or ultimatums or stolen files could tear down. I'm rowing my own boat now. The water is calm. The shore is beautiful. And it belongs to me. I lost a husband, but I found my life. And that $50,000? It's now the foundation of a future where no one tells me to kneel. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story moved you, please like the video and share your own thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to start over? Let's talk below.